It all started when we inherited the heirloom from my grandmother. She had passed away under mysterious circumstances, but none of us had seen it coming. The will reading was a somber affair, with family members gathered in her creaky old house, the air thick with unspoken words and unresolved grievances. When the lawyer handed us the small, intricately carved wooden box, I felt an immediate unease. My mother, ever the pragmatist, dismissed my feelings as nothing more than grief. We took the box home, placing it on the mantel as a reminder of Grandma. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a beautiful amulet made of an unusual dark metal, almost black, but glinting with an iridescent sheen in the light. From the moment we brought it home, things started to change. At first it was little things. My father received a job promotion out of the blue, my mother's health improved dramatically, and I, who had always struggled academically, suddenly found my schoolwork effortless. We were happy, basking in this newfound fortune, but it wasn't long before the darkness began to creep in. It started with the neighbors. Mrs. Thompson, the sweet old lady who lived next door, fell down her stairs and broke her hip. 2 days later, the Johnsons' dog was hit by a car. It seemed like every week someone in our neighborhood suffered an unfortunate accident. We chalked it up to bad luck, but deep down I felt a growing sense of dread. One night, I had a nightmare. I was in the living room, the heirloom box on the mantel glowing with an eerie light. The amulet was floating above the box and I could hear whispers, dark and sinister, filling the room. I woke up in a cold sweat, but the whispers lingered in my mind. The next morning as I walked to school, I noticed a police car parked in front of the Stevens house. Mrs. Stevens had been found dead in her garden, her face twisted in an expression of terror. The whispers from my dream echoed in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow connected to the heirloom. I told my parents about my dream, but they laughed it off. "It's just a coincidence," my father said, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. My mother squeezed my shoulder reassuringly, but her grip was too tight, her knuckles white. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of our breathing. Then, from the living room came a faint, metallic clinking sound. We fumbled for flashlights, and when the lights finally came back on, we found the heirloom box open, the amulet lying on the floor. My mother picked it up, her face pale. "We need to put this away," she said, her voice trembling. She locked the box and placed it in the attic, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. The heirloom had already sunk its claws into our lives, and there was no escaping its grip. That night, I couldn't sleep. The whispers returned louder this time, and with them, a sense of impending doom. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what price we would have to pay for our good fortune. In the morning, we received more news. Mr. Harris, my father's colleague who had been vying for the same promotion, had been in a car accident. He was in a coma, and doctors weren't sure if he would wake up. My father didn't say much, but I saw the guilt etched on his face. As the days passed, the whispers grew louder, the accidents more frequent. It was clear that the heirloom brought not just good fortune, but also a terrible curse, and it was only a matter of time before it demanded its next victim. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in our household became unbearable. The whispers were relentless, a constant background noise that gnawed at our sanity. My parents tried to carry on as if nothing was wrong, but the strain was evident. My father's hands shook when he thought no one was looking, and my mother had taken to staring blankly out the window for hours on end. One night, as I lay in bed trying to drown out the whispers with music, I heard a strange noise coming from the attic. It was a soft, scraping sound like nails on wood. My heart pounded as I tiptoed up the stairs, flashlight in hand. The attic door creaked open, and the sound grew louder. The beam of my flashlight sliced through the darkness, illuminating boxes of old clothes and forgotten memories. Then I saw it, the heirloom box. It was shaking, the lid rattling as if something inside was trying to get out. I approached it slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but I had to know. As I reached for the box, the rattling stopped. The sudden silence was deafening, and for a moment I thought I had imagined it all. But when I lifted the lid, the amulet was gone. Panic surged through me. I frantically searched the attic, but there was no sign of it. I ran downstairs to tell my parents, but they were already in the living room staring at the fireplace. The amulet was there, hanging from a hook above the mantel, glinting ominously in the firelight. My mother's face was ashen. "How did it get there?" she whispered. Before we could discuss it further, the phone rang. My father answered, his face growing paler with each word. When he hung up, he turned to us, eyes wide with fear. "That was the hospital," he said. "Mr. Harris passed away." We sat in stunned silence, the reality of our situation sinking in. The heirloom was not just cursed, it was actively seeking out victims. We needed to get rid of it, but how? Every attempt to move it only seemed to make things worse. That night, I had another nightmare. I was back in the living room, but this time the amulet was floating above the fireplace, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. The whispers were louder, forming words I couldn't quite understand. I reached out to grab it, but my hand passed through it as if it were made of smoke. The shadows grew darker, creeping towards me, and I woke up screaming. The next morning, my mother was gone. We searched the house, the yard, and even the woods behind our home, but there was no sign of her. The police were called, but they found no clues. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The whispers were louder than ever, and I felt a crushing guilt. It was our fault. No, it was my fault. I had brought this upon us. My father became a shell of his former self, withdrawing into silence. He spent hours in the living room staring at the amulet, as if hoping it would give him answers. I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't respond. The once warm and loving home had become a prison of fear and despair. One evening, as I was cleaning up the kitchen, I heard a noise from the living room. I rushed in to find my father standing on a chair, the amulet clutched in his hand. His eyes were wild and he was muttering something under his breath. "Dad, what are you doing?" I cried, but he didn't seem to hear me. He raised the amulet, and for a moment it glowed with an unholy light. The whispers reached a fever pitch, and then there was a blinding flash. When I could see again, my father was lying on the floor, unconscious. The amulet lay beside him, dark and cold once more. I called an ambulance and they rushed him to the hospital. He had no physical injuries, but he remained comatose, just like Mr. Harris had been. The doctors were baffled, but I knew the truth. The heirloom had claimed another victim. As I sat by his bedside, the whispers filled my mind, promising more suffering to come. I had to find a way to end this curse before it destroyed us all. But with every passing day, the shadows grew darker, and the sense of impending doom loomed ever larger. My father remained in the hospital, his condition unchanged. I was left alone in the house, surrounded by memories and the oppressive presence of the heirloom. The whispers had become a constant drone, a maddening background noise that made it impossible to think clearly. I avoided the living room as much as possible, but the amulet's presence was pervasive. It felt like it was watching me, unseen eyes following my every move. I started to feel paranoid, jumping at every creak and shadow. Sleep became a distant memory, and my grades at school began to suffer once more. One afternoon, while rummaging through the attic in search of something to distract myself, I came across an old photo album. It was filled with pictures of my grandmother and her family. As I flipped through the pages, I noticed something strange. In almost every photo, the heirloom was present, sometimes prominently displayed, other times subtly hidden in the background. The final photo in the album caught my eye. It was a picture of my grandmother as a young woman, holding the amulet and looking terrified. The date scrawled on the back was shortly before she had died. My heart raced as I realized that the heirloom had been a part of our family for generations, leaving a trail of tragedy in its wake. Determined to learn more, I visited the local library to research our family history. What I found was chilling. The heirloom had been passed down for centuries, and with each new owner, a pattern of misfortune and death followed. It was clear that the amulet was cursed, but the origins of the curse remained a mystery. As I delved deeper into the past, I found a mention of a woman named Eliza Blackwood, an ancestor who had been accused of witchcraft in the 17th century. She had been executed, but not before cursing the town and her own family. The amulet, it seemed, was the vessel of her curse, a conduit for her vengeance. Armed with this knowledge, I returned home, determined to break the curse. But as night fell, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They spoke of darkness and blood, of sacrifice and suffering. I felt a cold dread settle over me, but I couldn't give up. I had to save my family. That night, I awoke to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, listening as the steps moved closer, stopping just outside my room. The door creaked open and I saw a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. It was my mother. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She stepped into the room, her eyes vacant, her movements stiff and unnatural. She raised a hand, and I saw the amulet dangling from her fingers. "You need to leave," she said, her voice distant and hollow. "The curse cannot be broken." Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the hallway. I jumped out of bed and followed her, but she was gone. I searched the house frantically, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had never been there at all. Terrified and confused, I returned to my room, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? Was it just another cruel trick of the curse? As I lay back down, I felt something cold against my skin. I looked down to see the amulet resting on my chest, the whispers louder than ever. Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. Grabbing a few essentials, I fled into the night, the amulet clutched tightly in my hand. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get away. The town was eerily quiet, the streets deserted, and every shadow seemed to hide unseen eyes. I made my way to the old church on the outskirts of town, hoping to find some refuge there. The whispers seemed to grow fainter as I approached, giving me a small glimmer of hope. Inside, the church was dark and empty, the air thick with the scent of old wood and incense. I knelt before the altar, clutching the amulet, and prayed for guidance. But the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. They spoke of sacrifice, of bloodshed, and of the terrible price that had to be paid to end the curse. As I knelt there, I realized the truth. The curse could not be broken by simply getting rid of the amulet. It demanded a life, a final sacrifice to appease the vengeful spirit of Eliza Blackwood. And I knew that the only way to end the nightmare was to confront the darkness head-on. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had to sacrifice someone to end the curse, but who? The thought of taking a life was unbearable, yet the whispers demanded it. As I knelt in the dark church, I felt the weight of the amulet pressing down on me, its cold surface seeming to pulse with malevolent energy. Desperation clouded my mind. I couldn't kill an innocent person, but maybe there was another way. I thought of my grandmother's terrified expression in the old photo, and a plan began to form. If Eliza Blackwood's spirit was bound to the amulet, perhaps confronting her could break the curse. I spent the next day researching old rituals and exorcisms, piecing together a plan. The local library's archives held ancient texts on witchcraft and dark magic, and I found references to rituals that could summon spirits and banish them. It was dangerous, but I had no other choice. That night, I returned to the church carrying the necessary supplies: candles, salt, and a piece of chalk. I drew a circle on the floor, placing the candles at its points and spreading the salt around the perimeter. In the center, I placed the amulet, its dark surface glinting ominously. With a deep breath, I began the incantation, my voice trembling. The air grew colder, the whispers rising to a crescendo. The shadows in the church seemed to stretch and twist, and the candles flickered as if in response to an unseen wind. The amulet began to glow, and a figure materialized before me. Eliza Blackwood stood in the center of the circle, her eyes burning with hatred. "You dare summon me?" she hissed, her voice echoing with ancient malice. I steeled myself, meeting her gaze. "I want to end the curse," I said, my voice shaking. "You've taken enough lives. Please, let my family go." She laughed, a cold, cruel sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think it's that simple? My suffering was great, and my vengeance will not be denied. The amulet demands blood." "Then take mine," I said, surprising myself with the firmness of my words. "If a life is required, take mine and end this curse." Eliza's expression softened for a moment, a flicker of something almost human crossing her face. "You would sacrifice yourself?" she asked, her tone incredulous. "For them?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "I love my family. I won't let them suffer any longer." She seemed to consider this, her eyes narrowing. "Very well," she said finally. "Your sacrifice will appease the amulet, but know this: your soul will be bound to it just as mine was. There is no escape, even in death." I nodded, accepting the grim fate. As she raised her hand, a cold numbness spread through my body. The room seemed to spin, and the whispers grew deafening. I closed my eyes, ready to accept my fate, but then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I opened my eyes to see my mother standing beside me, her face serene. "No," she said softly, looking at Eliza. "The curse ends here." Before I could react, she stepped into the circle, placing her hand on the amulet. A brilliant light erupted and Eliza screamed, her form dissolving into shadows. The whispers ceased abruptly and the amulet fell to the floor, its glow extinguished. I collapsed, gasping for breath, and my mother knelt beside me. "Mom, what did you do?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "I couldn't let you sacrifice yourself," she said, her voice weak but determined. "I'm sorry for everything, but it had to end." I held her as she took her last breath, her body growing cold in my arms. The curse was broken, but at a terrible cost. The amulet lay lifeless on the floor, its power gone. I buried it deep in the churchyard, hoping it would never be found again. The following days were a blur of grief and confusion. My father remained in the hospital, his condition slowly improving. When he finally woke up, I couldn't bring myself to tell him the full truth of what had happened. We mourned my mother together, trying to piece our lives back together. Though the whispers had ceased, the memories of those dark days haunted me. The amulet's curse had taken so much from us, but I was determined to honor my mother's sacrifice. We sold the house and moved away, seeking a fresh start far from the shadows of our past. But sometimes late at night, I swear I can still hear faint whispers, like echoes of a nightmare that refuses to die. And I can't help but wonder if, somewhere out there, the curse still lingers, waiting for its next victim. We moved to a new town, far from the haunted memories of our old home. My father and I tried to rebuild our lives, but the scars left by the curse ran deep. He threw himself into his work, and I focused on my studies, but the shadow of the past was always there, lurking just out of sight. It was a few months after the move that I first noticed the signs. Small things at first, a cold draft in my room, objects moving on their own, and the faintest whispers in the dead of night. I tried to ignore them, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But deep down, I knew the curse wasn't truly gone. One evening, I was in the attic of our new house, sorting through some old boxes. Among them, I found a dusty old book with no title. As I flipped through the pages, I realized it was a journal, written in a shaky hand. The entries spoke of a cursed amulet, of sacrifices and suffering. It seemed too coincidental, and my heart raced as I read on. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas Blackwood, a distant relative I'd never heard of. His entries detailed his efforts to escape the curse, mirroring my own experiences. He spoke of the amulet's origins, tracing it back to Eliza Blackwood and her vengeful spirit. But unlike us, Thomas had found a way to contain the curse. His final entry was dated just days before his death. It described a ritual to bind the amulet's power, to trap it in a place where it could do no harm. He had hidden the amulet in a secret chamber beneath his house, sealing it away with powerful wards. But the journal ended abruptly, leaving me with more questions than answers. Determined to find the truth, I did some research on Thomas Blackwood and discovered that his house was just a few towns over. I convinced my father to take a trip with me under the guise of exploring our family history. He seemed reluctant but agreed, hoping it might bring some closure. When we arrived at the old Blackwood estate, it was clear the house had been abandoned for years. The windows were boarded up and the garden was overgrown with weeds. We managed to find a way inside, the air thick with dust and decay. It felt like stepping back in time, the house frozen in a state of disrepair. I followed the instructions in the journal, searching for the hidden chamber. After hours of searching, we found a trapdoor in the basement, covered by a heavy rug. My father and I pried it open, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the earth. The air grew colder as we descended, and I could feel the presence of the curse growing stronger. At the bottom of the stairs, we found a small stone room. In the center was a pedestal, and on it lay the amulet. It looked just as I remembered, its dark surface glinting in the dim light. The walls were covered in symbols and runes, the same ones described in the journal. They seemed to pulse with energy, holding the curse at bay. My father looked at me, his face pale. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice trembling. I nodded, though fear gnawed at my insides. "We have to make sure it stays here," I said. "We can't let anyone else suffer because of it." We followed the instructions in the journal, reinforcing the wards and sealing the chamber. As we worked, the whispers grew louder, a chorus of anger and despair. But with each symbol we drew, their power seemed to wane, the oppressive presence fading. When we finished, we stood back and looked at our work. The amulet lay trapped, its dark power contained. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a sense of relief washing over me. We made our way back upstairs, sealing the trapdoor behind us. As we left the house, I looked back one last time, hoping we had finally put an end to the curse. But deep down, I knew the darkness was never truly gone. It lingered, waiting for a chance to return. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences at our new home ceased. The whispers were gone, and the sense of unease lifted. My father and I started to heal, the nightmares slowly fading. But I never forgot the lessons we learned. The curse may have been contained, but the memory of it would always haunt us. I kept the journal as a reminder, a testament to the horrors we had faced. And as I looked to the future, I vowed to protect my family from any darkness that might come our way. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear faint whispers, like echoes of a nightmare that refuses to die. And I can't help but wonder if, somewhere out there, the curse still lingers, waiting for its next victim. Life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. My father and I found a rhythm in our new town, forging a path forward. The nightmares became less frequent, and the whispers seemed to be a thing of the past. But the scars left by the curse were always there, a constant reminder of the horrors we had endured. One day I was sorting through some old family documents when I found a letter addressed to my grandmother. It was from Thomas Blackwood, dated just a few months before his death. The letter spoke of his fears about the amulet, his desperate search for a way to contain its power, and his concern for future generations. He mentioned a key, a small, intricate piece of metal that he believed was crucial to binding the curse. I had never seen such a key among our possessions, but the letter ignited a curiosity within me. I began to search the house for any hidden compartments or secret places where it might be kept. Days turned into weeks, and just when I was about to give up, I found it, a small ornate box hidden in the back of my grandmother's wardrobe. Inside was the key, its surface covered in intricate runes that matched the ones in the stone chamber beneath the Blackwood estate. Alongside it was another letter, this one from my grandmother. She wrote about her discovery of the key and her decision to keep it hidden, fearing what might happen if it fell into the wrong hands. She believed it was the final piece needed to ensure the amulet's power was contained forever. I knew what I had to do. I had to return to the Blackwood estate and use the key to complete the binding ritual. My father was hesitant, but he understood the necessity of it. We made the journey once more, the weight of the key heavy in my pocket. The estate was just as we had left it, shrouded in an eerie silence. We descended the dark staircase to the stone chamber, the air thick with the same oppressive energy. The amulet lay on the pedestal, its presence still ominous but contained by the wards. I approached the pedestal, the key in hand. The runes on its surface seemed to glow faintly as I inserted it into a small hidden slot at the base of the pedestal. A low hum filled the room, and the symbols on the walls pulsed with a brighter light. The whispers began again, but this time they were different, less malicious, almost resigned. As I turned the key, a wave of energy surged through the chamber. The amulet glowed brightly before dimming, its power seemingly drained. The whispers faded, replaced by a profound silence. I felt a sense of finality, as if a great burden had been lifted. We left the estate, the key still in my pocket, a safeguard against the amulet ever being unleashed again. As we drove away, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The curse was finally contained, and I hoped it would remain that way. The following weeks were peaceful. My father and I began to heal in earnest, the nightmares fading into distant memories. We found solace in our new life, the darkness of the past no longer looming over us. I returned to my studies with renewed vigor, determined to make the most of the second chance we had been given. But despite the peace, I couldn't shake a lingering unease. The amulet's power was contained, but I knew the key was still a dangerous artifact. I decided to hide it just as my grandmother had, ensuring it would be safe from those who might misuse it. I chose a place only I knew about, a secret that would die with me. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft knock on my door. My father stood there, a concerned look on his face. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice gentle. We sat in the living room, the glow of the fireplace casting long shadows on the walls. He spoke of his fears, his lingering doubts about the curse. We shared our thoughts and feelings, finding comfort in each other's presence. It was a moment of healing, a step towards reclaiming our lives from the shadows. As the fire burned low, I felt a sense of closure. The curse had taken so much from us, but it had also brought us closer together. We had faced the darkness and survived, and now it was time to move forward. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear faint whispers like echoes of a nightmare that refuses to die. And I can't help but wonder if, somewhere out there, the curse still lingers, waiting for its next victim. Months passed and our lives settled into a comfortable routine. The nightmares were fewer and further between, and the whispers had all but ceased. I began to believe that perhaps at long last the curse was truly behind us. But fate had other plans. It was a rainy evening when a knock came at our door. My father was out of town on business, leaving me alone in the house. I hesitated, a sense of unease washing over me as I approached the door. Through the peephole I saw a man standing on the porch, soaked to the bone. He was tall, with a gaunt face and piercing eyes. Something about him seemed off, but I couldn't place what it was. Reluctantly, I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "My car broke down and I was hoping to use your phone to call for assistance." Despite my better judgment, I let him in, showing him to the phone in the hallway. As he made his call, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen him before. His presence filled the house with an uncomfortable tension, and I found myself glancing at the clock, wishing my father would return soon. The man finished his call and turned to me with a faint smile. "Thank you," he said, his eyes lingering on me a moment too long. "I won't trouble you any further." As he left, I locked the door behind him, a shiver running down my spine. Something about the encounter felt wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint why. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me long into the night. Later, as I lay in bed, I heard a noise outside my window, a soft tapping like fingers drumming against the glass. I sat up, heart pounding, and peered through the curtains. The man was standing there, his face inches from the glass, eyes wide and unblinking. I screamed, stumbling back from the window. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. I grabbed my phone and called my father, my hands shaking. "Dad, there's someone outside," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lock yourself in your room," he instructed. "I'll call the police. Stay on the line with me." I did as he said, barricading myself in my room as the tapping continued. The police arrived quickly, but when they searched the property, the man was gone, leaving no trace behind. They assured me it was likely just a transient looking for shelter, but I knew it was something more. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me, and the whispers began to return, faint but persistent. My father tried to reassure me, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We both knew the curse was not as contained as we had hoped. A few days later, while walking home from school, I noticed the same man following me at a distance. His presence sent a wave of panic through me, and I quickened my pace, ducking into side streets and alleyways to lose him. But no matter where I went, he was always there, just out of sight. Desperation drove me to confront him. "Why are you following me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" He stepped closer, a predatory smile spreading across his face. "You have something of mine," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "The key." My blood ran cold. "What key?" I asked, trying to feign ignorance. "Don't play dumb," he snapped. "I know you have it. Give it to me and maybe I'll let you live." I realized then that he wasn't just a random stalker. He knew about the amulet, the curse, and the key. Somehow he had discovered our secret, and he wanted the power the key represented. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear his footsteps behind me, growing closer with each passing second. I knew I couldn't lead him back to my house, couldn't put my father in danger. So I ran towards the one place I hoped would offer some protection, the old church on the outskirts of town. I burst through the doors, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The church was empty, the air thick with the scent of incense. I ran to the altar, clutching the key tightly in my hand. The man followed me inside, his eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. "You can't escape me," he said, his voice echoing through the empty church. "Give me the key and this will all be over." I backed up against the altar, my mind racing. The key had the power to bind the curse, but it also had the power to unleash it. I had to make a choice, and I had to make it fast. As he approached, I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. Then, with all the strength I could muster, I raised the key and plunged it into the altar. A blinding light filled the church, and a wave of energy surged through the room. The man screamed, his body contorting as the power of the key enveloped him. The light grew brighter and the whispers became a deafening roar. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The man was gone, and the church was silent once more. I collapsed to the floor, the key still clutched in my hand. I had no idea what had just happened, but I knew one thing for certain. The curse was far from over. The church was silent, the only sound my ragged breathing echoing off the stone walls. I sat there for what felt like hours, clutching the key in my trembling hand. My thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The man was gone, but his words lingered in my mind. "You have something of mine." When I finally found the strength to stand, I slipped the key into my pocket and made my way home. My father was waiting for me, his face etched with worry. I told him everything, from the man's eerie presence to the confrontation in the church. He listened silently, his expression growing more grave with each passing detail. "We need to understand what this key truly is," he said finally. "It's clear it holds more power than we realized, and if there are others who know about it, we must be prepared." Together we delved deeper into our family history, scouring old letters, journals, and documents. The more we uncovered, the more we realized how intertwined our family was with the curse. The Blackwood lineage was filled with tales of dark magic and forbidden rituals, all centered around the amulet and the key. One night, while poring over an ancient tome, we discovered a passage that chilled us to the bone. It spoke of a pact made by Eliza Blackwood with a malevolent entity, a deal that bound her descendants to the curse. The amulet was a vessel of this dark power, and the key was both its lock and its trigger. The journal also revealed something even more sinister. The man who had pursued me was not just any descendant. He was a direct heir of Eliza Blackwood, a twisted soul born of the same dark pact. His goal was to reclaim the amulet's power and unleash its full potential, no matter the cost. Armed with this new knowledge, my father and I devised a plan. We had to ensure the key remained hidden and the amulet's power contained. But we also had to protect ourselves from those who would stop at nothing to possess it. The following days were tense. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and the whispers had returned, more insistent than ever. My father and I took turns keeping watch at night, our nerves frayed by the constant sense of danger. One evening, as I sat by the window, I saw movement in the shadows outside. The man had returned, his eyes gleaming with malevolent intent. He circled the house, his presence a constant threat. I knew it was only a matter of time before he made his move. That night, I had a vivid dream. I was back in the stone chamber beneath the Blackwood estate, the amulet glowing ominously on the pedestal. Eliza Blackwood stood before me, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and rage. "You cannot escape the curse," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. "The key is not just a lock, it is a conduit. Its power can be harnessed, but it comes with a price." I woke with a start, her words ringing in my ears. The key was more dangerous than we had realized, a tool that could both bind and unleash the curse's power. I knew what I had to do. I had to destroy it. I told my father about the dream and he agreed. We couldn't risk the key falling into the wrong hands. We decided to return to the Blackwood estate one last time, to the place where it all began. Under the cover of darkness, we made our way to the old house. It was eerily quiet, the air thick with the weight of history. We descended the stairs to the stone chamber, the amulet still lying on the pedestal, its power dormant but palpable. With a heavy heart, I placed the key on the pedestal beside the amulet. My father and I performed the ritual described in the ancient texts, invoking the power of the symbols and runes. As we chanted, the room filled with a blinding light, the energy crackling around us. The amulet and key began to vibrate, their surfaces glowing with an intense heat. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, and I felt a surge of power course through my body. Then, with a final thunderous crack, the the key shattered into pieces, the light fading as quickly as it had come. The silence that followed was profound. The amulet lay lifeless on the pedestal, its power seemingly extinguished. The key was gone, its shards scattered across the floor. We left the estate, the weight of our actions heavy on our shoulders. The key was destroyed, and with it we hoped the curse. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was not the end. The darkness we had faced was ancient and deep-rooted, and I knew it would not be vanquished so easily. Back at home, life resumed its uneasy calm. The whispers had ceased, and the sense of being watched faded. But the memory of the man, the heir of Eliza Blackwood, haunted me. I knew he was still out there, and I feared what he might do next. The days turned into weeks, and slowly we began to heal. But sometimes late at night I still hear faint whispers, like echoes of a nightmare that refuses to die. And I can't help but wonder if somewhere out there the curse still lingers, waiting for its next victim. The weeks following the destruction of the key were marked by an uneasy peace. My father and I tried to move on, but the shadows of our past loomed large. I often found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man with the piercing eyes standing there. One afternoon, as I walked home from school, I noticed a woman watching me from across the street. She was dressed in black, her face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Something about her felt eerily familiar, and a shiver ran down my spine. I quickened my pace, hoping to lose her in the crowd, but when I glanced back, she was gone. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the whispers again. They were faint, almost indistinguishable from the rustling of the wind, but they were there. I sat up, straining to hear, and caught fragments of words: heir, curse, power. My heart raced as I realized the curse was not as defeated as we had hoped. I decided to do more research on Eliza Blackwood and her descendants, hoping to find some clue that would help us finally put an end to the curse. I spent hours at the local library, combing through old records and newspaper articles. It was there that I stumbled upon a chilling revelation. The woman I had seen watching me was not a stranger. She was Catherine Blackwood, Eliza's granddaughter and a powerful witch in her own right. Her name appeared in several articles about strange occurrences and unexplained deaths, always on the periphery but never directly implicated. I realized with growing dread that she was the true heir to the curse, and she was after us. I rushed home to tell my father. He listened intently, his face growing pale as I recounted what I had learned. "We need to be careful," he said. "Catherine is dangerous. We can't let her get to us." We fortified our home, adding locks and charms to ward off any dark magic. My father took leave from work to keep watch, and I stopped going out alone. Despite our precautions, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. One evening, while my father was out gathering supplies, there was a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat as I peered through the peephole. It was Catherine. Her eyes were cold and calculating, and her smile sent a chill down my spine. "Open the door," she called, her voice smooth and commanding. "I know you're in there." I backed away, my mind racing. She knocked again, harder this time. "You can't hide from me forever. The power of the Blackwood bloodline belongs to me." In a panic, I ran to the basement, hoping to find a place to hide. The whispers grew louder, urging me to flee, but there was nowhere to go. I heard the front door splintering as Catherine forced her way inside. I crouched behind a stack of old boxes, my heart pounding in my ears. Catherine's footsteps echoed above me, slow and deliberate. "You can't escape your destiny," she called, her voice chillingly close. "The curse will find you no matter where you hide." I heard her descending the stairs, and I knew I was out of time. I grabbed a heavy wrench from a nearby toolbox, clutching it tightly. Catherine stepped into the basement, her eyes scanning the dimly lit room. "There you are," she said, her smile widening. "Give me the amulet and I might let you live." I didn't respond, fear paralyzing me. She took a step closer, and I could see the malevolent glint in her eyes. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," she said. "The power of the amulet is rightfully mine." In a desperate move, I lunged at her with the wrench. She dodged effortlessly, her laugh cold and mocking. "Foolish child," she said, "you can't fight me." But just as she reached for me, a blinding light filled the room. Catherine screamed, recoiling in pain. My father appeared at the top of the stairs, a glowing talisman in his hand. "Stay away from my son," he commanded, his voice strong and unwavering. Catherine snarled, her eyes burning with hatred. "This isn't over," she spat, retreating up the stairs. "The curse will consume you both." The light faded and my father rushed to my side. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling with concern. I nodded, my heart still racing. "We need to finish this," I said. "We need to destroy the amulet once and for all." My father agreed. We gathered our things and set out for the Blackwood estate one last time, determined to end the curse that had plagued our family for generations. The journey was long and fraught with danger, but we knew it was our only hope. As we approached the estate, a sense of foreboding washed over us. The air was thick with dark energy, and the whispers were louder than ever. We steeled ourselves and entered the house, making our way to the stone chamber beneath. The amulet lay on the pedestal, its dark surface pulsating with malevolent power. We began the ritual, invoking the symbols and runes to destroy it. The room filled with a blinding light, and the whispers rose to a deafening roar. Catherine appeared at the entrance to the chamber, her face twisted with rage. "You can't do this," she screamed. "The power belongs to me." But it was too late. The light intensified, and the amulet shattered into 1,000 pieces. A wave of energy surged through the room, and Catherine was thrown back, her screams echoing in the chamber. When the light faded, the whispers were gone. The amulet lay in ruins, its power extinguished. We had done it. The curse was finally broken. We left the estate, the weight of generations of darkness lifted from our shoulders. As we drove away, I felt a sense of peace for the first time in years. The nightmare was over and we could finally begin to heal. But sometimes late at night, I still hear faint whispers, like echoes of a nightmare that refuses to die. And I can't help but wonder if somewhere out there, a new darkness is waiting to rise. In the weeks that followed the destruction of the amulet, life slowly began to return to normal. My father and I started to rebuild our lives, free from the shadow of the curse. The whispers had ceased, and the constant sense of dread that had plagued us for so long was finally gone. But the peace was fragile, and deep down I knew that Catherine Blackwood would not give up so easily. Her thirst for power was too great, and the hatred in her eyes as she had been thrown back by the amulet's destruction haunted my dreams. One night, as a storm raged outside, there was a knock at the door. My father and I exchanged a worried glance. We knew that whoever was out there could only mean trouble. My father picked up the glowing talisman he had used to drive Catherine away before, and I grabbed the heavy wrench I had kept close ever since our last encounter. We cautiously opened the door to find Catherine standing on the porch, drenched from the rain, her eyes burning with fury. Behind her, shadows seemed to writhe and twist as if the darkness itself was alive. "This ends tonight," she hissed, stepping forward. "You may have destroyed the amulet, but the power it held is mine by right. You cannot deny me." My father raised the talisman, its light cutting through the darkness. "Stay back, Catherine," he warned. "We won't let you harm us." She laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think that trinket can protect you? The curse is in your blood, and there is no escaping it." With a wave of her hand, the talisman shattered, its light snuffed out. The house plunged into darkness, the only illumination coming from the occasional flash of lightning. Catherine advanced, her presence filling the room with an oppressive, suffocating weight. Desperation fueled my actions. I swung the wrench at her, but she deflected it effortlessly, sending me crashing to the floor. My father lunged at her, but she caught him with a flick of her wrist, sending him flying across the room. "You are nothing," she spat, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "I am the true heir of the Blackwood power, and I will not be denied." As she approached me, I felt a surge of defiance. I remembered the words from the ancient texts, the symbols and runes that had helped us before. With a trembling hand, I began to draw the symbols on the floor, chanting the incantations we had learned. Catherine's eyes widened as she realized what I was doing. She lunged at me, but it was too late. The symbols glowed with a fierce light, and the air crackled with energy. The room filled with a blinding light, and Catherine screamed, her body convulsing as the power of the ritual took hold. The light intensified, and I felt a force pulling at me, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. Catherine's screams echoed in my ears, and I could see her form twisting and writhing, consumed by the power she had sought to control. Then with a final thunderous crack, the light exploded outward and everything went dark.